Title: I became the mother of a ruthless male protagonist. Chapter 1: A New Beginning. The sound of a baby crying startled me awake. I blinked at the unfamiliar surroundings, a grand nursery adorned with golden curtains and intricate carvings. My body felt different, and when I looked down, I was wearing an elegant, flowing gown. "Oh no," I whispered, realization dawning. I had transmigrated into Ashes of Steel and Blood, one of my favorite novels. But not as the powerful female lead or even an intriguing side character. No, I had become Elena de Leone, the tragic mother of the male protagonist, Kael de Leone. In the original story, Elena died young, and her absence was one of the reasons Kael grew into a ruthless figure consumed by revenge. A whimper drew my attention to the cradle beside me. A baby with silvery hair and striking violet eyes looked up at me, his cheeks wet with tears. This was Kael, the future male lead who would one day bring the world to its knees. "Mother's here," I said softly, picking him up. His cries quieted as he snuggled into my arms. My heart ached as I gazed at him. How could such a sweet baby grow into a fearsome villain? Elena held the baby in her arms, her thoughts racing. She couldn't afford to let her son, Kael, follow the tragic path outlined in the novel. Every decision, every moment, would count in shaping his future. The door creaked open, and a maid entered, bowing deeply. "My lady, Duke Leone requests your presence in the study." Elena froze. Duke Leone, her husband in this world, was a cold, calculating man who cared little for his wife and son. In the novel, his neglect of Kael and obsession with power were key reasons for Kael's eventual transformation into a cruel ruler. She kissed Kael's forehead, whispering, "Stay strong, my little one. I'll make sure you grow up in a world that deserves you." Handing him to the maid, Elena straightened her shoulders and made her way to the study. The Duke's study was as imposing as its owner, towering shelves of books, a massive oak desk, and a chilling aura of authority. Duke Leone looked up from his papers, his sharp features betraying no warmth. "You're here," he said curtly, not bothering to rise. "Yes, my lord," Elena replied, suppressing a shiver. "I trust you've been taking care of Kael adequately," he said, his tone indifferent. "Of course," she replied, keeping her voice steady. The Duke nodded, his attention already drifting back to the papers before him. "Good. See to it that he doesn't embarrass the Leone name." Anger bubbled in Elena's chest, but she forced a polite smile. "Kael is my top priority. I'll ensure he becomes someone worthy of admiration." The Duke waved a dismissive hand. "Do as you please." A mother's resolve. Elena left the study, her resolve hardening. She couldn't rely on the Duke for support or guidance. If she wanted Kael to grow into a kind and strong man, she would have to do it alone. Back in the nursery, Kael was gurgling happily, reaching for a soft toy. Elena sat beside him, stroking his silvery hair. "From now on, we'll do things differently," she murmured. "You'll grow up surrounded by love and kindness. No one will use you as a pawn, and you won't have to shoulder the burdens of this family alone." A new routine. The days passed in a blur of small but significant changes. Elena personally oversaw Kael's care, ensuring he was nurtured not just physically but emotionally. She began teaching him basic words and concepts, emphasizing compassion and fairness. "Kael, can you share this with the maid?" she asked one day, holding out a small piece of fruit. Kael looked up at her, his violet eyes curious. "Share?" "Yes," Elena said with a smile. "When we have something good, it's nice to share it with others. It makes everyone happy." Kael hesitated, then toddled over to the maid and offered her the fruit. The maid's surprised smile warmed Elena's heart. A growing threat. As Kael grew, so did the challenges. The Duke's distant attitude made him vulnerable to the manipulations of the scheming nobles surrounding their family. Rumors spread about Elena's meddling in her son's upbringing, and some began to question her influence. One afternoon, the Duchess of a neighboring estate paid an unannounced visit. "My dear Elena," the woman said with a syrupy smile, "I hear you've been quite hands-on with little Kael. Isn't that the nanny's job?" Elena's smile didn't falter. As his mother, it's my duty to ensure Kael grows up with strong values. I wouldn't entrust that responsibility to anyone else. The Duchess's smile wavered, but she quickly recovered. How admirable. Though, one wonders if it's appropriate for a lady of your standing to be so involved. Elena's eyes hardened. I believe what's best for my son is what's best for this family. Surely you agree, Duchess? The Duchess left soon after, her expression tight. A glimpse of Kael's potential. By the time Kael turned 3, his intelligence and determination were evident. He absorbed lessons quickly and showed a natural talent for swordplay. Mother, look, he exclaimed one day, holding up a small wooden sword. Elena clapped her hands. You're amazing, Kael. But remember, strength is a tool to protect, not to hurt. Kael nodded solemnly. I'll protect you, Mother. Her heart swelled with pride, but a flicker of worry lingered. She had to ensure his protective instincts didn't turn into dangerous possessiveness. Chapter 1 ending, a new ally. One evening, while walking in the garden with Kael, Elena encountered a young scholar named Adrian, who had been hired to tutor the children of the estate. Lady Elena, Adrian said, bowing politely. I've heard much about young Kael. It would be an honor to assist in his education. Elena studied Adrian carefully. His kind eyes and gentle demeanor reassured her. Perhaps he could be the ally she needed to guide Kael down the right path. Welcome, Adrian, she said with a smile. Let's work together to give Kael the future he deserves. As the sun set over the garden, Elena felt a glimmer of hope. With Kael by her side and Adrian as their ally, perhaps they could rewrite the story after all. Chapter 2, A Tutor's Influence. Adrian began his work as Kael's tutor the following week. His lessons were unorthodox, focusing not just on academics but also on empathy and critical thinking. In their first lesson, Adrian placed 2 wooden blocks on the table before Kael. One block was small and plain, while the other was larger and painted in vibrant colors. Kael, Adrian said, smiling, which block is more important? Kael tilted his head, his violet eyes flicking between the blocks. The big one? Adrian chuckled. Most people would think so, but let me show you something. He stacked the larger block on top of the smaller one. See how the big one relies on the small one for balance. Without the small block, the big one would fall. Kael's eyes widened as he reached out to touch the blocks. So, they're both important? Exactly, Adrian said. Just like people. No one is too small to matter. Elena watched from the doorway, her heart warming at the sight. Adrian's methods were unconventional, but they were precisely what Kael needed to develop compassion and a sense of fairness. Building a bond. As the weeks turned into months, Kael and Adrian developed a close bond. Adrian became more than just a tutor, he was a mentor and a friend. One afternoon, while practicing swordplay, Kael stumbled and scraped his knee. Mother! Kael cried, his lip trembling as he held his injured leg. Elena rushed to his side, kneeling before him. Oh, my brave boy. It's just a little scrape. Let's clean it up. Adrian knelt beside her, producing a handkerchief. Kael, do you know what makes a person strong? Kael sniffled, shaking his head. It's not about never falling, Adrian said, gently dabbing at the wound. It's about getting back up every time you do. Kael's tears slowed as he nodded solemnly. I'll get up. Elena exchanged a grateful glance with Adrian. His presence was a steadying force, not just for Kael but for her as well. The Duke's interference. Not everyone in the household was pleased with the changes in Kael. Duke Leone, ever the pragmatist, began to notice his son's increasing independence and emotional intelligence. To him, these traits were weaknesses, not strengths. Why does he spend so much time with that tutor? The Duke demanded one evening during dinner. Adrian is helping Kael develop skills that will serve him well in the future, Elena replied, keeping her tone neutral. The Duke's eyes narrowed. I hired Adrian to teach him strategy and warfare, not sentimental nonsense. Kael is a child, Elena said firmly. He needs to learn kindness and empathy as much as he needs to learn strategy. Duke Leone scoffed. Kindness won't win battles. No, Elena agreed, her voice steady, but it will win loyalty. A ruler who understands his people's needs will always be stronger than one who rules through fear. The Duke's expression darkened, but he said nothing more. A new challenge. One day, as Adrian was teaching Kael about the importance of listening to others, a messenger arrived with a summons for Elena. My lady, the messenger said, bowing, the council requests your presence at the estate tomorrow. Elena's stomach tightened. The council was known for its political machinations, and she suspected this summons had something to do with her growing influence over Kael. I'll be there, she said, dismissing the messenger. Adrian noticed her unease. Is everything all right, Lady Elena? She forced a smile. Just politics. Nothing to worry about. But as she looked at Kael, happily engrossed in his lesson, she resolved to stay vigilant. If the council sought to undermine her efforts, they would find her more formidable than they expected. A mother's resolve. That night, Elena stood by Kael's bedside, watching him sleep. His small hand clutched a stuffed animal Adrian had given him, a simple rabbit that he refused to part with. I won't let them take you away from me, she whispered. You deserve a chance to grow up free of their schemes and expectations. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but Elena was determined to see it through. For Kael's sake, she would face any obstacle, even if it meant standing against the Duke, the council, or anyone who threatened her son's future. And so, with Adrian by her side and a fire in her heart, Elena prepared for the battles to come. Little did she know, her actions would not only change Kael's fate but also reshape the entire Leone family's destiny. Chapter 3, A Battle of Wills. The next day, Elena entered the council chamber with her head held high. The room was filled with noblemen, each seated around a long mahogany table. Their faces were masks of politeness, but their eyes betrayed their true intentions. They saw her as an interloper, a woman daring to wield influence where they believed she had no place. Lady Elena, said Lord Raviel, a senior council member, his voice dripping with false courtesy. We appreciate your presence today. It seems there are concerns regarding the direction young Lord Kael's education is taking. Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. Concerns? Or objections to a boy being raised with empathy and understanding? A murmur rippled through the room. The council hadn't expected her to be so direct. Empathy is all well and good, Lord Raviel continued, but we must prepare Lord Kael to lead. Kindness has no place on the battlefield. Elena stepped closer to the table, her voice steady and resolute. A true leader does not rule solely through strength and fear. A kingdom built on such foundations will crumble. Kael will be a ruler who earns the loyalty of his people, not their resentment. The council exchanged uneasy glances. Her argument was sound, but it challenged their traditional views of leadership. Your passion is admirable, another lord interjected, but the Duke has expressed concerns as well. Should we not defer to his judgment? Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone calm. The Duke may see Kael's future through the lens of warfare, but I see it through the lens of survival. A ruler must do more than conquer, he must endure. That is the legacy I intend to leave for my son. The tension in the room was palpable, but Elena stood her ground. She knew this battle was far from over, but she had planted a seed of doubt in their minds. Kael's awakening. Back at the estate, Adrian decided it was time for Kael to confront his own fears. They ventured to the stables, where a young, spirited horse awaited them. Kael, Adrian said, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, this horse is much like you, full of potential but uncertain of its own strength. Today, you'll learn to ride it. Kael's eyes widened. What if I fall? Then you'll get back up, Adrian replied with a reassuring smile. Strength isn't about never falling, it's about always rising. With Adrian's guidance, Kael climbed onto the horse. The animal shifted nervously, sensing Kael's hesitation. Speak to it, Adrian instructed. Show it that you're not afraid. Kael hesitated before gently patting the horse's neck. It's okay, he whispered. We'll figure this out together. To Adrian's delight, the horse calmed, and Kael managed a few unsteady steps. His face lit up with pride. See? Adrian said. You're stronger than you think. Elena arrived just in time to see Kael riding, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time, she saw the beginnings of the leader Kael could become, a boy learning to overcome his fears, not by brute force but by understanding and partnership. The Duke's ultimatum. That evening, the Duke returned to the estate, his face a mask of displeasure. You defied the council, he said, his voice cold as he cornered Elena in the drawing room. Do you know what that means? I know exactly what it means, Elena replied, her voice firm. It means I'm doing what's right for Kael, even if it goes against your narrow vision of leadership. The Duke stepped closer, his presence intimidating. You're overstepping your bounds, Elena. Kael is my son, and I will decide his future. Elena met his glare without flinching. He's our son, Leone. And I'll fight for his future, even if it means standing against you. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension crackling like a storm about to break. You've made a dangerous enemy, the Duke said finally, his voice low and menacing. Then you should tread carefully, Elena replied, her tone equally steely. Because I won't back down. Adrian's support. After the confrontation, Adrian found Elena in the garden, her face pale but determined. You were brave today, Adrian said, offering her a cup of tea. I don't feel brave, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I can't let them control Kael's future. Adrian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this, Elena. I'm here to help, every step of the way. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of her struggles seemed to lift. With Adrian by her side, Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they would protect Kael from the forces trying to shape him into something he wasn't. And in doing so, they would lay the foundation for a future where Kael could grow into the compassionate, strong leader he was meant to be. Chapter 4, Seeds of Rebellion. The days following the Duke's return were tense. The council's disapproval lingered in every corner of the estate, and the servants whispered about the growing divide between the Duke and Elena. Despite this, Elena threw herself into her duties with renewed determination. She began gathering allies, those who believed in her vision for Kael and the future of the duchy. Adrian was the first. Loyal and unwavering, he became her confidant, her sounding board, and her strength. But she needed more than just his support. A strategic alliance. One evening, Elena invited Lady Mariella, a widow of considerable influence, to the estate. Mariella had always been an outlier in the court, sharp-witted and unafraid to speak her mind. You've been bold, Elena, Mariella said over tea, her keen eyes studying the younger woman. Challenging the council isn't something many would dare. It's not about daring, Elena replied, her voice steady. It's about necessity. Kael's future, and the future of the duchy, depends on a different kind of leadership. Mariella smiled faintly. And you think you can rally the nobles to your cause? I don't need all of them, Elena said. Just enough to make it impossible for the Duke and the council to ignore me. Mariella chuckled. You remind me of myself when I was younger, fierce, idealistic. I'll stand with you, Elena. But know this, politics is a battlefield, and you'll need to play the game better than they do. Kael's growth. Meanwhile, Kael was blossoming under Adrian's guidance. The boy who once clung to his mother in fear was now taking tentative steps toward independence. One morning, Kael approached Elena with a serious expression. Mother, may I join the servants in their tasks today? Elena raised an eyebrow. Why would you want to do that? I want to understand their lives, Kael said earnestly. If I'm to lead them someday, I need to know how they live and what they need. Elena's heart swelled with pride. Of course, my darling. But remember, leadership isn't just about understanding, it's about compassion too. That day, Kael worked alongside the stable hands, mucking stalls and carrying water. The servants were initially hesitant, but Kael's genuine curiosity and kindness won them over. By evening, he returned to Elena, dirty but beaming. "They work so hard, Mother. I want to make things better for them when I'm older." Elena hugged him tightly. "You will, Kael. I know you will." The Duke's counterattack. The Duke wasn't idle during this time. Leone, ever the tactician, began consolidating his own power. He convened secret meetings with the council, framing Elena's actions as reckless and undermining. One evening, he confronted her again, this time in the Great Hall. "You've been busy," he said coldly. "Rallying support, spreading your ideals. Do you think I don't see what you're doing?" "I'm preparing Kael for his future," Elena replied calmly. "A future where he isn't a puppet for your ambitions." Leone's eyes narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elena. If you continue down this path, you'll force my hand." Elena stood her ground. "And what will you do, Leone? Strip me of my position? Separate me from my son? The people won't stand for it." Leone's silence was telling. For all his bluster, he knew that Elena's growing influence among the nobles and the people was becoming a threat he couldn't easily dismantle. A public challenge. The turning point came during a grand festival held in the duchy. Nobles and commoners alike gathered in the town square for a day of celebration. Elena saw this as an opportunity to present her vision for Kael's future. As the Duke prepared to address the crowd, Elena stepped forward, surprising everyone. "Citizens of Eldoria," she began, her voice clear and commanding. "Today, we celebrate not just our heritage, but the strength of our community. Strength that comes not from fear, but from unity and compassion." The crowd murmured in surprise, but they listened. "I envision a future where our leaders understand and care for their people," Elena continued. "A future where my son, your future Duke, rules with wisdom and heart." Leone glared at her, but he couldn't interrupt without causing a scene. Elena turned to Kael, who stood by her side. "Kael, what do you wish to say to your people?" Kael stepped forward, his voice small but earnest. "I promise to be a duke who listens and learns. I want to make this duchy a better place for everyone." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Leone's fall. The Duke's attempts to undermine Elena reached a breaking point. The council, swayed by public opinion and Mariella's influence, began to distance themselves from him. Rumors of his secret dealings and manipulations began to surface, further eroding his credibility. One fateful day, the council convened without him, declaring Elena as Kael's primary guardian and advisor. Leone, furious and humiliated, left the estate, vowing to return. A new dawn. With the Duke's shadow lifted, Elena focused on rebuilding the duchy. She worked tirelessly, ensuring that Kael's education and upbringing were grounded in empathy and justice. Adrian remained by her side, their partnership deepening into something more. Together, they navigated the challenges ahead, united by their love for Kael and their shared vision for the future. And Kael? He grew into a leader his people respected and adored, a boy who had faced his fears and emerged stronger, ready to shape the duchy into a realm of hope and prosperity. Elena finally felt at peace, knowing she had not only protected her son but had also changed the course of their destiny. Chapter 5: Shadows of the Past. The days after Leone's departure were filled with hope, but Elena knew better than to assume their troubles were over. The Duke's vow to return hung over the duchy like a storm cloud. Kael had settled into his role as a young leader in training, but his sudden rise in visibility brought unexpected attention from those who had been loyal to Leone. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the outer regions of the duchy. A secret letter. One evening, Adrian brought a letter to Elena. "It was intercepted by one of our spies," he said, his face grim. The letter was addressed to Leone, written in a code Elena had once seen during her years at court. Deciphering it took hours, but when she finished, the implications chilled her. The letter revealed that Leone had been quietly forging alliances with rival noble families, promising them lucrative positions in exchange for their support to reclaim the duchy. "They're planning to strike during Kael's 10th birthday celebration," Elena said, her hands trembling as she read the final lines. "They think the festivities will leave us vulnerable." Adrian's jaw tightened. "We can't let this happen. We'll need a plan." The unexpected ally. The next morning, a stranger arrived at the estate. Dressed in a hooded cloak, she carried an air of authority and danger. "I'm here to speak to Lady Elena," the woman said to the guards. Elena met the stranger in her study, Adrian standing protectively at her side. "My name is Seraphine," the woman said, removing her hood to reveal striking features and sharp eyes. "I was once loyal to Duke Leone, but I can no longer support his methods. He's become reckless, and his alliances will bring ruin to the duchy." Elena studied her carefully. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I know his plans," Seraphine replied. "And because I owe you a debt. Years ago, when your charity fed my starving village, I vowed to repay your kindness. Consider this my payment." Seraphine laid a map on the table, marking the locations of Leone's allies and their planned movements. The birthday celebration. Kael's 10th birthday arrived with a grand celebration. The estate was adorned with banners and flowers, and the townspeople gathered to join the festivities. Elena had instructed her allies to remain vigilant, disguising security measures as part of the celebration. Kael, blissfully unaware of the danger, laughed and played with the other children. Watching him, Elena felt a pang of guilt for the shadow of danger looming over such a joyous occasion. As the sun began to set, the first signs of trouble emerged. A group of men, dressed as servants, tried to infiltrate the estate. But Seraphine's intelligence had been accurate, and they were quickly apprehended. Adrian led the security forces, ensuring the safety of the guests. But as the night wore on, Leone himself appeared, flanked by a small army of loyalists. Leone's ultimatum. "Elena," Leone called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Step aside, and I'll spare your precious son. This is your last chance to do the right thing." Elena stepped forward, her voice steady. "The only thing you've ever cared about is power, Leone. You won't get it here." The tension was palpable as the two sides faced off. Kael, shielded by Adrian, watched with wide eyes as his mother stood firm against his father. "You've made your choice, then," Leone sneered. But before he could give the order to attack, Seraphine stepped out of the shadows, flanked by a group of soldiers loyal to Elena. "This ends tonight," Seraphine said, her sword drawn. The battle. Chaos erupted as Leone's forces clashed with Elena's. Adrian fought with the precision of a seasoned warrior, protecting Kael at all costs. Seraphine proved her loyalty, taking down several of Leone's men with swift, calculated strikes. Amid the chaos, Leone made a desperate attempt to reach Kael, his face twisted with anger and determination. "Kael," he shouted. "I'm your father. You belong with me." But Kael, trembling yet resolute, stood behind his mother. "You're not my father. A father protects his family. You only want to hurt us." Leone's expression faltered for a moment, but his desperation quickly turned to fury. A final twist. Just as Leone lunged toward Kael, Elena stepped forward, a dagger hidden in her sleeve. With a swift motion, she slashed at his arm, disarming him. The remaining loyalists, seeing their leader defeated, surrendered. As Leone was taken into custody, he spat bitter words at Elena. "This isn't over." But Elena, standing tall and unwavering, replied, "It is for you. A new beginning." With Leone's threat neutralized, the duchy finally began to heal. The council formally recognized Elena as Kael's guardian and regent until he came of age. Kael, inspired by his mother's courage, vowed to become a leader worthy of the trust placed in him. Elena, though scarred by the events, found solace in the support of her allies, particularly Adrian, whose loyalty had never wavered. As the estate returned to its peaceful rhythm, Elena allowed herself a rare moment of quiet. Standing in the garden, she watched Kael play and thought, "We've endured the storm. Now, it's time to build a future worth fighting for. Chapter 6, The Aftermath. The courtyard was quiet now, save for the muffled sounds of the subdued loyalists being led away. Elena stood tall, though her heart still raced. Leonie's words lingered in her mind like an unshakable shadow. This isn't over. Kael approached her cautiously, his small frame trembling but his gaze steady. Mother, is it really over? Elena knelt before him, brushing a lock of hair from his face. For now, my son. But we must always be prepared for what comes next. Adrian joined them, his sword sheathed but his expression no less serious. Leonie's allies won't disappear overnight. We've dealt a significant blow, but there's work to be done. Elena nodded. Begin the interrogations immediately. I need to know the extent of his network. We can't let another attack catch us off guard. Leonie's manipulations. Inside the estate's holding cells, Leonie sat with an air of defiance, his hands bound. He smirked as Seraphine entered, accompanied by Adrian. Come to gloat? Leonie asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Seraphine met his gaze with cold indifference. No, Duke Leonie. I came to ensure you understand the depth of your failure. Leonie chuckled, leaning back against the wall. Failure? This is a temporary setback. Do you think your little rebellion will undo the years of alliances I've built? You've only delayed the inevitable. Adrian's patience thinned. Your arrogance will be your downfall. We've already intercepted your correspondence. Your so-called allies are crumbling under the weight of their own greed. But Leonie's smirk widened. And yet, I remain here, alive. That was your first mistake. Strengthening alliances. Elena wasted no time consolidating her position. Letters were sent to noble families and influential figures across the duchy, inviting them to a council meeting. She needed their loyalty, not only to secure Kael's future but also to stabilize the region. When the council convened days later, Elena addressed them with poise and authority. My late husband sought power through fear and manipulation, she began, her voice steady. But I believe in a duchy united by trust and fairness. Together, we can build a future where our children can thrive without the shadow of tyranny. The room erupted in murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, while others remained skeptical. A prominent nobleman, Lord Gareth, stood. You speak of unity, Lady Elena, but how do we know you won't resort to the same methods as your predecessor? Elena met his gaze firmly. Judge me by my actions, not my words. I invite each of you to oversee the reforms I will implement. Transparency will be my greatest ally. Her words carried weight, and by the end of the meeting, the majority pledged their support. Kael's growth. As the duchy began to stabilize, Kael threw himself into his studies. He trained with Adrian, learning both swordsmanship and strategy. Despite his youth, he showed remarkable determination. One afternoon, as they sparred in the courtyard, Kael asked, Adrian, do you think I'll ever be strong enough to protect Mother? Adrian paused, resting his sword against the ground. Strength isn't just about wielding a blade, Kael. It's about making the right choices, even when they're difficult. And from what I've seen, you already possess that kind of strength. Kael smiled, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes. The return of an old flame. Amid the rebuilding efforts, an unexpected visitor arrived at the estate. Elena's heart skipped a beat when she recognized him. Marcus, a childhood friend and once a suitor before her marriage to Leonie, stood at the gates. Marcus, she whispered as he approached, his familiar smile both comforting and bittersweet. It's been a long time, Elena, he said, bowing slightly. I heard of your struggles and came to offer my support. His presence stirred memories Elena thought she had buried. They spoke late into the evening, reminiscing about simpler times and discussing the challenges ahead. Adrian watched from a distance, a flicker of unease in his expression. He admired Elena deeply but had never voiced his feelings. Now, with Marcus's return, he couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. Leonie's desperation. Meanwhile, Leonie's imprisonment began to wear on him. Realizing that brute force wouldn't free him, he turned to manipulation. Through bribed guards, he managed to send messages to his remaining allies, urging them to sow discord within the duchy. Elena was alerted to the betrayal when Seraphine uncovered a hidden correspondence during a routine inspection. "We have a traitor among us," Seraphine said, placing the letter on Elena's desk. Elena's expression hardened. "Then we'll root them out. No one will undermine this duchy again." A new era. With Leonie's influence waning and the duchy stabilizing, Elena began to envision a brighter future. Marcus's presence brought her moments of joy, but she remained cautious. Adrian, torn between his duty and his emotions, finally approached her one evening. "Elena, I've stood by your side through everything. I just need to know, do you see me as more than an ally?" His vulnerability caught her off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "Adrian, you've been my rock," she said softly. "I can't imagine navigating this without you. But right now, my priority is Kael and the duchy." Though her words were honest, they left Adrian conflicted. The promise. On a peaceful morning, Elena stood with Kael, overlooking the thriving estate. "Do you see this, Mother?" Kael said, his voice filled with wonder. "This is what you fought for." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is what we fought for, Kael. And together, we'll ensure it lasts." As the sun rose higher, Elena felt a sense of hope she hadn't known in years. Though challenges remained, she was no longer alone. Her allies, her son, and her own resolve would see them through. And somewhere deep within the estate's cells, Leone plotted his next move, his shadow still lingering over their newfound peace. Chapter 7, The Shadow of Leone. Leone sat in the dimly lit cell, his face a mask of cold fury. The walls echoed with faint whispers of guards outside, their muted conversations reminding him of his confinement. But Leone's mind was far from idle. Through the bribed guard who had smuggled out his letters, he received word that a faction of nobles still loyal to him was regrouping. These were men and women who had benefited from his rule, who thrived under his tyranny and feared losing their power under Elena's reforms. "They think they've won," Leone muttered to himself, a sinister grin forming on his lips. "But they've underestimated me." That night, under the guise of a routine transfer, the bribed guard smuggled Leone out of his cell. By the time his absence was discovered, he was already on the move, heading toward the Loyalists' hidden base deep within the northern woods. A glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Elena felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. Though the duchy was slowly stabilizing, she knew the peace was fragile. Kael continued to train rigorously, and his growth as a young leader became increasingly evident. One afternoon, as he sparred with Adrian in the courtyard, he paused to ask, "Do you think Father will ever come back?" Adrian hesitated, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. "Your father is a man who craves power, Kael. Men like him rarely disappear willingly." Kael's face hardened, his youthful innocence replaced with a quiet determination. "If he does, I'll be ready." Elena overheard their conversation from the balcony. Her heart swelled with pride at Kael's resolve, but a lingering unease gnawed at her. Marcus's influence. Marcus had quickly integrated himself into the estate's affairs, assisting Elena with diplomacy and strategy. His presence brought a renewed sense of stability, but it also stirred unresolved emotions. One evening, as they worked late in the study, Marcus placed a hand on Elena's. "You've done an incredible job, Elena. Few could endure what you have and still stand so strong." Elena looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't have a choice. Kael needed me, and this duchy needed me. There was no room for weakness." Marcus smiled warmly. "Strength doesn't mean being unfeeling. You're allowed to lean on others." Before she could respond, Adrian entered the room, his expression serious. "We've received troubling news. Leone has escaped." The threat unveiled. The revelation of Leone's escape sent shockwaves through the estate. Seraphine immediately doubled the guards and ordered nightly patrols, but Elena knew Leone wouldn't be so easily deterred. Days later, a message arrived. It was a missive bearing Leonie's personal seal, delivered directly to Elena's chambers. She broke the seal and read the note, her hands trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Did you think I would disappear so easily? The duchy will be mine again, and when it is, you'll pay for your defiance. Watch your back, Elena. This is far from over. Leonie. Elena crumpled the letter in her hand, her resolve hardening. If he thinks he can intimidate me, he's sorely mistaken. Unraveling Leonie's network. Determined to strike before Leonie could gather more strength, Elena and her allies launched a campaign to uncover his remaining loyalists. Seraphine worked tirelessly, interrogating captured nobles and tracing their connections. One such interrogation revealed a shocking truth: Leonie had allied himself with a foreign faction, promising them control of key trade routes in exchange for their support. This isn't just about reclaiming the duchy, Seraphine said during a strategy meeting. If Leonie succeeds, he'll destabilize the entire region. Adrian slammed his fist on the table. Then we can't wait for him to make the first move. We need to take the fight to him. A battle of wits. Elena devised a plan to lure Leonie into a trap. She sent a false message through a known informant, claiming that a critical council meeting would take place in a secluded location. If Leonie takes the bait, he'll reveal himself, Marcus said, studying the map spread out before them. Elena nodded. And when he does, we'll be ready. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance to confront Leonie head-on. The confrontation. On the night of the staged meeting, Elena, Adrian, and their forces lay in wait. Hidden among the trees, they watched as Leonie and his men approached the supposed meeting point. As Leonie entered the clearing, Elena stepped out of the shadows, her sword drawn. It's over, Leonie. Surrender now, and I may spare your life. Leonie laughed, his voice echoing through the night. You've always underestimated me, Elena. Do you think I came here without a plan? At his signal, more men emerged from the woods, outnumbering Elena's forces. But she had anticipated this. Adrian raised his hand, and reinforcements poured in from all sides, cutting off Leonie's escape routes. A new beginning. The battle was fierce, but Elena's forces prevailed. Leonie was captured once more, this time placed under the strictest guard. His loyalists were either arrested or driven into exile. With the threat finally neutralized, Elena returned to the estate, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. Kael met her at the gates, his eyes filled with admiration. You did it, Mother. You protected us. Elena embraced him, tears streaming down her face. No, Kael. We did it. Together. As the sun rose over the duchy, Elena felt a renewed sense of hope. The shadows of the past had been vanquished, and a brighter future awaited them. Chapter 8, The Aftermath. The duchy had returned to a semblance of peace, though the scars of the recent turmoil were still fresh. The battle against Leonie and his loyalists had been won, but the cost was evident. Fields were trampled, villages were damaged, and the people were weary, though grateful for their restored stability. Elena stood on the balcony of the estate, overlooking the courtyard where workers and guards bustled about, repairing walls and rebuilding structures. The air was crisp with the scent of freshly tilled earth, a reminder of both destruction and rebirth. Are you all right? Marcus asked as he approached, his voice breaking her reverie. Elena sighed, her gaze still fixed on the bustling activity below. I'm relieved, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Leonie may be in chains, but his shadow still looms over us. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll deal with whatever comes next, together. You're not alone in this anymore. She turned to him, offering a faint smile. Thank you, Marcus. For everything. A mother's resolve. Kael had grown quieter in the days following the battle. Though he had fought bravely and earned the respect of many, the reality of his father's actions weighed heavily on him. One evening, Elena found him in the library, poring over an old book on the history of the duchy. Kael, she called softly, stepping into the room. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. I was just reading about the founding of our duchy. About how it was built on principles of justice and protection for its people. It's hard to reconcile that with what father did. Elena sat beside him, her heart aching for her son. Your father lost sight of those principles, but that doesn't mean they're lost to us. You have the power to honor them, Kael. To be the kind of leader this duchy needs. Kael nodded, his resolve strengthening. I will, mother. I won't let his mistakes define us. Leonie's manipulations. Leone, now imprisoned in a remote, heavily guarded fortress, was far from defeated. His cunning mind was already at work, crafting schemes to sow discord from within his cell. Through smuggled messages, he spread rumors among the nobles, painting Elena as a tyrant who had unlawfully seized power. Some of the more opportunistic or disillusioned nobles began to question her leadership, despite her sacrifices for the duchy. The unrest reached its peak during a council meeting, where a particularly vocal noble, Lord Rathburn, accused Elena of overstepping her bounds. Your Grace, Rathburn began, his tone dripping with feigned politeness, while we are grateful for your efforts in quelling the rebellion, some of us wonder if the concentration of power in your hands is truly in the duchy's best interest. Elena met his gaze with unflinching determination. The power I hold is not for personal gain but to ensure the safety and prosperity of our people. If anyone doubts my intentions, they are welcome to step forward with a better solution. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the council. Rathburn, though momentarily silenced, exchanged a knowing glance with another noble, hinting at a deeper conspiracy. A new ally. During this time, a stranger arrived at the estate, a woman with striking silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She introduced herself as Lady Selene Valcrest, a scholar and diplomat from a neighboring duchy. I've heard of your struggles and your triumphs, Duchess Elena, Selene said during their first meeting. I believe we may have common interests, and I offer my assistance in stabilizing your realm. Elena was cautious but intrigued. What interests would those be, Lady Selene? Selene leaned forward, her voice lowering. The same as yours, protecting this duchy from those who seek to exploit its people. And, perhaps, ensuring that those who wronged you face the justice they deserve. Elena studied her carefully, sensing both sincerity and mystery in her words. Very well, Lady Selene. Let's see how we can help each other. A web of deception. As Selene began her work, uncovering hidden plots and alliances among the nobles, Elena found herself drawn to the woman's keen intellect and unwavering determination. One evening, Selene approached Elena with a bundle of documents. These are letters exchanged between Lord Rathburn and a foreign envoy. It seems your former husband isn't the only one with foreign allies. Elena scanned the documents, her blood boiling. Rathburn's been colluding to undermine the duchy's sovereignty. This can't stand. Selene smiled faintly. I thought you'd say that. Shall we expose him? The public reckoning. A grand assembly was called, gathering nobles and citizens alike. In the central square, Elena and Selene presented the evidence of Rathburn's treachery, laying bare his collusion with foreign forces. The crowd's anger was palpable, their trust in Elena renewed as they saw her commitment to justice. Rathburn was arrested on the spot, his pleas drowned out by the people's cries for accountability. Kael, watching from the sidelines, felt a surge of pride in his mother. She's not just saving the duchy, he whispered to Adrian. She's rebuilding its heart. A fresh start. With the conspiracies dismantled and trust restored, Elena turned her focus to the future. She worked tirelessly to implement reforms, ensuring that power was more evenly distributed among the council and the people. Kael, under Marcus's mentorship, began taking on more responsibilities, proving himself a capable and compassionate leader. And amidst it all, Elena allowed herself a moment of peace. Sitting in the garden one afternoon, watching Kael laugh with Marcus and Selene discuss plans with Adrian, she felt a rare sense of contentment. The shadows of the past had not disappeared, but they no longer defined her. She had built something stronger, something lasting. And as she looked toward the horizon, she knew the future held endless possibilities. Chapter 9, Whispers of the Past. The public exposure of Lord Rathburn's treachery had brought a temporary calm to the duchy, but whispers of dissent still lingered in the shadows. Though Leone was imprisoned and Rathburn disgraced, their actions had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of some nobles and citizens. Elena, ever vigilant, knew better than to rest on her laurels. She summoned her closest allies, Kael, Marcus, Selene, and Adrian, to discuss the lingering unrest. "We've quelled the immediate threats," Elena began, her tone resolute, "but there are still those who question our intentions. We must win them over, not with force, but with undeniable proof of our commitment to the duchy's future." Marcus nodded. "The people trust you, Elena. If we strengthen our ties with the nobles who remain loyal, we can isolate the dissenters further." Selene added, "We should also focus on rebuilding the duchy's economy. A prosperous land is a united land. If we can create opportunities for all, even the discontented will find it harder to rally support." A hidden ally. As the meeting continued, a servant interrupted with an unexpected message. "Your Grace, a visitor awaits in the main hall." They claimed to have information regarding Leone's remaining allies. Elena's brow furrowed. "Who is this visitor?" The servant hesitated. "A woman named Ira. She claims to be from Leone's inner circle." The room fell silent. Kael's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword. It could be a trap. Elena stood, her expression steely. "Perhaps. But if she has information, we can't afford to ignore it. I'll speak with her, under guard." The strangers bargain. In the grand hall, a tall woman with dark hair and piercing green eyes stood waiting, flanked by 2 guards. She bowed slightly as Elena entered, her movements graceful yet guarded. "Duchess Elena," Ira began, her voice low and steady, "I come bearing no weapons, only truths. I served Leone for years, but his ambition blinds him to reason. He underestimated you, and that was his downfall." Elena's eyes narrowed. "And why would you betray the man you serve so loyally?" Ira smiled faintly. "Leone's loyalty is a one-way street. When he was captured, he abandoned his most devoted followers to save his own skin. I owe him nothing. But I see in you a leader who values strength tempered with justice." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "I can give you the names of his remaining allies, those who hide in plain sight among your court. In exchange, I ask for one thing, protection." Elena studied her carefully, searching for any signs of deceit. "If your information proves true, you'll have it. But know this, if you attempt to deceive me, there will be no place in this duchy where you can hide." The web unravels. Over the next week, Ira's information proved invaluable. Hidden factions within the court were revealed, their members quietly detained and questioned. Kael, who had initially been wary of Ira, found himself working alongside her during interrogations. He couldn't deny her sharp mind and resourcefulness, though he remained cautious. "You're quick to adapt," he remarked one evening as they reviewed reports together. Ira smirked. "Survival requires adaptability, young lord. But don't mistake pragmatism for loyalty. I serve only those who earn my trust." Kael nodded, his respect for her growing despite his reservations. "Then let's hope my mother continues to earn it." The ex-husband's gambit. As peace began to take hold, a letter arrived bearing Leone's seal. It was addressed to Elena and delivered in secret, bypassing the usual channels. Curious and wary, Elena opened it. The contents were chilling. "My dearest Elena. You've won this round, but the game is far from over. Your son's strength, your allies' loyalty, your newfound peace, they're all illusions. I know your weaknesses, and I will use them. Be ready, for the storm is coming." Elena's hands tightened around the letter, her mind racing. She summoned Selene immediately. "This changes nothing," Selene said after reading the letter. "Leone wants you to be afraid, to hesitate. We press forward, stronger than ever. He thrives on chaos, let's deny him that satisfaction. A new dawn. Determined to protect her family and her duchy, Elena doubled down on her efforts. Reforms were implemented swiftly, corruption rooted out, and the people's faith in their leaders began to grow. Kael, inspired by his mother's resilience, took an even more active role in governance, earning the admiration of the people. He often sought advice from Marcus and Selene, forging bonds that would prove unshakable. And amidst it all, Elena found herself drawn to Marcus in ways she hadn't expected. His quiet strength and unwavering support had been a pillar during her darkest days, and she began to wonder if there could be room for happiness in her life once more. The storm looms. Though progress had been made, Elena knew the battle was far from over. Leone's threats lingered like a dark cloud, and she couldn't shake the feeling that his next move would be his most dangerous yet. But as she stood before her people, flanked by Kael, Marcus, Selene, and even the enigmatic Ira, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever comes next, she vowed silently, we will face it together. And this time, we will not merely survive, we will thrive. Chapter 10, The Gathering Storm. The winds of change were tangible in the air, a charged anticipation that made even the tallest spires of the castle seem to tremble in their foundations. Elena stood on the balcony of the duchy's highest tower, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where dark clouds gathered like a foreshadowing of an impending storm. Her heart beat with the rhythm of the uncertainty that surrounded her. Marcus and Kael had both expressed their concern over Leone's latest letter, but Elena refused to let fear control her. She had already buried so much of her past, her husband's betrayal, her struggles, the uncertainty of her role as duchess, that she would not falter now. The duchy's future depended on her strength. But her heart, despite its steel-like resolve, was heavy with the burden of the upcoming confrontation. Her son, the future of the land, was still young, and though his abilities were sharp, she couldn't bear to think of him placed in harm's way. And Marcus, his unwavering support had become a beacon of hope in the dark, and Elena found herself wondering if there might be something more than just political alliance between them. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door behind her. "Elena?" Marcus's voice called softly. She turned, finding him standing there, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "You've been quiet." "I know this is difficult," Marcus said, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers. "But we will face this together. You don't have to carry this weight alone." She looked at him, surprised by the tenderness in his voice. The chaos of their world seemed so distant in that moment, and she realized just how much Marcus had become her anchor. "I know," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But there's something about the calm before the storm that unsettles me. I can feel it. I know Leone won't stop until he has everything he wants." Marcus took a step forward and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a touch that steadied her racing heart. "We'll be ready," he promised. "The alliances we've built, the strength of your leadership, everything is falling into place. The storm may come, but we'll weather it together." Chapter 11, Secrets Unveiled. As the days passed, the threat of Leone's return loomed larger with each passing hour. Elena knew she had to prepare for the worst. She couldn't let her guard down, not even for a moment. The last thing she wanted was for her people to suffer because of her oversight. It was then that she received word from Ira, who had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to uncover more about Leone's remaining allies. The woman had earned Elena's trust, proving herself invaluable in the quest to unravel the treacherous web of deception. "Your Grace," Ira began, bowing respectfully as she entered the war room, her face grim. "I've learned something crucial about Leone's plans." Elena leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Ira hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice low. "Leone is no longer working alone. He has secured the support of several powerful figures from outside the duchy. They've promised him resources, soldiers, and a network of spies." Elena's pulse quickened. She had expected something of this nature, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down her spine. "What's his next move?" she demanded, her mind already strategizing. "He plans to strike when you least expect it, disrupt the supply lines, create unrest among the people, and destabilize the borders." His allies are already moving. Ira's eyes met Elena's. But there's something more. A betrayal closer to home. Someone from your inner circle may be working with him. Elena's heart skipped a beat. A traitor. Her mind raced, trying to think of anyone who might be involved, anyone who could be capable of betraying her so directly. Chapter 12, Shadows Within. The news of a traitor within their ranks hit Elena like a blow to the chest. She had trusted everyone in her inner circle, Kael, Marcus, Selene, and even Ira. But the idea that someone could be working against her, feeding Leonie's enemies information, was a betrayal she couldn't allow to happen. Her mind wandered over the faces of everyone in her court, searching for a clue. Could it be one of her trusted advisors? Could someone have been planted in her midst to watch over her, waiting for the right moment to strike? Her worst fear was that the betrayal was closer than she thought. What if it wasn't an outsider conspiring against her, but someone she had called a friend? Marcus, Elena began, calling for him as she stood in her study, her eyes steady but filled with a growing unease. I need your help. He stepped forward without hesitation, his face a mask of concern. What is it? I need you to look into everyone. I need to know who among us could be working with Leonie. Who can't be trusted? Marcus nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. I won't let anyone hurt you. Chapter 13, The Truth Revealed. The days that followed were tense as Marcus and his team quietly began their investigation. Kael, ever loyal, helped as much as he could, though Elena could sense his growing discomfort with the secrecy surrounding the investigation. Late one evening, Marcus arrived at Elena's chambers with a grim expression. The truth had been uncovered, and it was far darker than she had ever imagined. Your Grace, Marcus began, his voice low, I've discovered the traitor. Elena's stomach turned. Who is it? He hesitated before speaking the name that shook Elena to her core. Selene. Chapter 14, The Final Confrontation. The revelation of Selene's betrayal shattered Elena. She had trusted Selene with her life, confided in her, and fought alongside her. The thought that Selene, someone who had been like a sister to her, would turn against her was unbearable. As night fell, Elena made the decision to confront Selene. She couldn't let her treachery go unpunished. When they faced each other, Selene's cold eyes revealed everything Elena needed to know. I didn't want it to be like this, Elena, Selene said, her voice tinged with regret. But Leonie promised me power. He promised me everything I ever wanted. Elena's heart shattered as she met her friend's gaze. And you thought betraying me would give you that? I thought I could change things. But I was wrong. I never thought I'd have to choose between loyalty and ambition. I was a fool. Chapter 15, A New Beginning. The traitor's fate was sealed. Selene was exiled from the duchy, and her name was erased from the annals of Elena's past. The duchy, despite its challenges, remained resilient. As the days grew longer and the threat from Leonie dwindled, Elena found herself looking toward a brighter future. With Kael by her side, Marcus in her council, and the support of her people, she had not only reclaimed her birthright as Duchess but had also paved the way for a better tomorrow. And as for the love that had begun to bloom between her and Marcus, it was a new chapter of hope, something that would carry her through whatever storms lay ahead. Elena had faced the darkest of betrayals, but in the end, she emerged stronger, ready to build a life worth living, one filled with peace, prosperity, and the promise of a future that would never again be threatened. Chapter 16, A New Dawn. The cold wind that had threatened to tear apart her world had finally subsided, leaving Elena standing amidst the rubble of her past and the fertile soil of a new beginning. The duchy was no longer a place of fear, but one of hope, where people began to whisper of their future with newfound optimism. Elena had worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been torn apart, and now the pieces were falling into place. Marcus stood beside her on the balcony, looking out over the sprawling gardens. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm golden light over the land, signaling the dawn of something new. The weight of the past few weeks seemed to lift with the setting sun, and for the first time in a long while, Elena felt at peace. Do you think it will be different now? She asked softly, her voice carrying the quiet exhaustion of someone who had fought for everything they had. Marcus turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "It will be better, Elena. You've shown them what true leadership is. The people see that now. And Leonie's influence is crumbling. You've taken back control, not just of the duchy, but of your own destiny." Elena nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. She had feared that the choices she made would cost her everything, but in the end, they had brought her strength she never knew she possessed. "What about Celine?" she asked, her tone somber. "I never thought she would betray me. I trusted her." Marcus's expression softened with understanding. "Betrayal is never easy. But it wasn't your fault. She made her own choices, and she'll have to live with them. You didn't fail her, Elena. You've only grown stronger because of it." Elena's heart ached as she thought of Celine. The woman she had once called her closest friend now exiled, her name a shadow in the corridors of the duchy. It was hard to reconcile the betrayal with the memories of the woman who had once fought by her side, but Elena had learned an important lesson. People change. Situations change. And with that change, sometimes the best thing you can do is let go, even if it's painful. "Thank you, Marcus," Elena whispered, looking into his eyes. "For standing by me through it all." He stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her face. "You didn't need my help to become the woman you are now. But I'm grateful I could be here for you. And I'll always be by your side, no matter what." His words sent a shiver of warmth through her, and Elena realized, in that moment, that she wasn't alone anymore. She had Marcus, Kael, and the people who believed in her. Together, they would rebuild the duchy and face whatever challenges the future brought. Chapter 17, Rebuilding Trust. As the months passed, Elena worked tirelessly to restore peace and prosperity to the land. The citizens who had once feared for their safety now felt a sense of security under her rule. The alliances she had forged with neighboring territories were strong, and the whispers of rebellion had finally quieted. In the wake of Leonie's defeat, Elena took on the responsibility of ensuring that such corruption would never again rise in her duchy. She established new laws, bringing in advisors who were loyal to the land, not to their own ambitions. The people began to see the true power of Elena's leadership, not through fear, but through the respect she had earned. Elena and Marcus's relationship grew stronger with each passing day. Their bond had started as one of necessity, built on mutual respect and shared goals. But somewhere along the way, it had blossomed into something more. They had fought side by side, supported each other through their darkest moments, and now, they stood together, ready to face the future. One evening, as they sat in the gardens of the duchy, Elena turned to Marcus, her heart full of gratitude and something deeper, something that had quietly taken root in the corner of her heart. "Marcus," she began, her voice hesitant but firm. "There's something I need to say." He looked at her with gentle curiosity, sensing the change in her tone. "You've been my strength, my support," she continued, her eyes locking with his. "And through everything, through all the pain, the betrayal, the loss, I've come to realize that I'm not just grateful for your loyalty, I'm thankful for you. I never thought I could feel this way again, but here I am." A soft smile tugged at Marcus's lips as he reached for her hand. "Elena, you've always had the strength within you. I've just been fortunate enough to witness it. And I can't imagine a future without you in it." For the first time in years, Elena felt a true sense of peace. The world was no longer a place of constant struggle, it was a place of possibility. The storm had passed, and in its wake, Elena had found herself. Chapter 18, A New Beginning. The day Elena officially declared her peace with Celine's exile was a day of reckoning, not just for her, but for the entire duchy. She understood that forgiveness would be a long journey, but it was a journey she was willing to take. She would rebuild, not just her duchy, but her relationships as well. Months passed, and the duchy flourished under Elena's reign. The land, once ravaged by greed and corruption, was now a beacon of prosperity and peace. Elena had become a symbol of resilience, a queen whose strength was not in her ability to rule with an iron fist, but in her ability to heal, to forgive, and to lead with a heart full of integrity. And as for Marcus, he stood by her side, not as an advisor, but as her equal. They ruled together, not just as leaders, but as partners, bound by a shared vision and the love they had found in the midst of chaos. As the years went by, Elena realized that the future she had once feared had finally arrived, beautiful, serene, and full of promise. She had faced the darkest storms and emerged stronger for it. And with Marcus by her side, there was nothing she could not face. For the first time in her life, Elena was truly free. And together, they would build a future where peace and love reigned forever.